Tell you a little bit about my experience with subwoofers and why I've hated them, I'd say for the past 25 years, and I refused to put them into my system. So it has been said that a quality subwoofer placed within a two-channel system will not only bring those lower registers of bass to your system, those lower registers that normal speakers can't usually reproduce. Not only does a quality subwoofer bring that solid foundation into your system when set up correctly, but it has been said, and I have been told, that if you go with a quality sub or a pair of subs and set them up in your two-channel system, I have been told I would never want to go back to listening to my system without said subwoofer. I have been told that a quality subwoofer not only enhances the bass performance of your system, but it also enhances the sound stage, the air, the holographic imaging. Now, that all sounds good in theory and on paper, but I want to tell you a little bit about my experience with subwoofers and why I've hated them, I'd say for the past 25 years, and I refused to put them into my system. So hate is a very strong word. I'll explain in a minute, but today's video is brought to you by the Music Room at tmraudio.com. I love the Music Room. They sell tons of quality used gear. I think they list 20 to 30 new items a day that you can get substantial savings on. They're also dealers for brand new equipment, much like the REL subwoofers. So thanks to the Music Room, tmraudio.com, for sending this out for review. Let's get back to the video. I never heard those benefits from any of the subs I've tried in the past, but I will admit in the past when I tried subwoofers, I always skimped out. I spent my money on my speakers, my amp. I never really had any money left to spend $2,000, $3,000, $4,000, $5,000 or more on a subwoofer solution. And so I always basically, with my speakers, looked for speakers that could output pleasing bass. They didn't have to rumble the floors, the couch, or the house. As long as they had a pleasing bass, I was happy. I'm not a bass hound. I'm not a bass freak. When I was a kid, I never put those big amps and subs into my cars. I just like pure, clean music with a holographic sound stage that sucks me into the performance. So over the years, I've tried cheap subs from Klipsch in the $500 range. They could never keep up with my speakers. That sub added a lot of boom, but it didn't add anything pleasing to the sound. It was more of a sloppy boom. When you add a cheaper sub, an inexpensive sub, to a high-quality, high-dollar system, that sub usually can't keep up with the speed of the speakers and the rest of your system, and therefore you might hear a lag in the bass, behind the bass from your speaker. So you'll hear like a from your speaker, and then right after you'll hear from the sub, and that messes up everything, right? The timing, the flow, it just sounds off. So I went many, many, many years without a sub. And last year I received a phone call from John Hunter. Now John Hunter is with REL Subs. If you're a two-channel audio buff fan, you know the name REL. REL has been around a long time, and they are known for making high-quality subwoofers, mostly for two-channel music listening. You can use your RELs with home theater, no problem, but REL makes subs that are fast enough and powerful enough to keep up with some of the most demanding high-end speakers that are made. Now, the speakers I use in my reference system are my Fleetwood DeVille SQs. They are expensive, and they are pretty good in the bass department. The mid-range is where they excel. They have a nice, gentle treble, a nice big, full mid-range, and the lower bass is a little lacking. I think they're rated down to 45 hertz. But in this room, I can't get any kind of pressurization from just the speakers. Even so, I've been thrilled with them without a subwoofer. But Let me go back to that phone call with John Hunter from REL. We talked for about an hour and a half, and at that time, about a year ago, he wanted to have someone come down and professionally install a REL or two subwoofer into my system. And he told me not only would I receive that bass reinforcement that my speakers do not provide all the way down to 20 hertz, he said that I would immediately notice an increase in things such as sound stage, width, depth, holographic imaging, air would improve, right? Vocals are said to improve. But at that time, my room wasn't ready. I didn't have a system that was locked in, and I didn't want them to come out and waste time putting in subs when something might be changed a week or two later. So I held off on that. So all this time goes by, and I ended up contacting the Music Room, tmraudio.com. They've sent me some pieces for review in 2022. So I said, can you send me a REL S510 for a couple weeks, and I'll review it if I like it, if it works out in my system. I keep hearing how musical these RELs are and how much easier they are to implement into a 2-channel system. So I figured if I could try it first, and if it met the expectations that I've been told about, then I would buy it and I would keep it in the system. So the Music Room sent me over the REL S510. The S series is a step up from the T series. The S510 starts out the S line, then it goes, I think, the S810, then the 212SX, then there's a Carbon Special. So I asked for the S510, which I think retails for $2,749. Now, this would be the most expensive sub I would ever try in a system. And the one thing I wanted to try was the high-level input on the REL. Each REL ships with a special cable that plugs into the back of the REL, and the other ends go to your speaker connectors on your amp, right? And REL says this is the preferable way to hook up the sub, and it makes it the easiest to implement and seamlessly integrate with your speakers. So I was excited to try this. When the sub arrived, it wasn't too unruly or heavy. I managed to get it out of the box by myself. I looked at all the videos on YouTube from John Hunter at REL about setting up the subs. I followed the instructions to a T, and at first I used the high-level connector to a Luxman 595 ASC, which was an integrated I had in at that time. And it took me about 4 days to get the sub to sound really, really good with my speakers. But there was still something that wasn't perfect. Some music would come on and there'd be a little bit too much bass and it would shake the floor and the walls. And with some music, I didn't even know the sub was on. Now, keep in mind, the goal of a subwoofer is not to add boom or bass, lower, you don't want to add, you're not looking to add boom, boom. It's not a car stereo. What a good subwoofer will do, as I mentioned earlier, and this has turned out to be the case, when you blend it seamlessly with your speakers, you should not know the sub is even on when it's on and working in your system. I used the high-level connectors, and it was sounding good. I was dialing it, tweaking it every day, and I finally got it to a point where I thought I was happy until some music would come on and it would be a mess. So I tried different locations for the sub. I did the sub crawl method, and it turns out that the best place for it was where REL recommended, which was in one of the corners behind a speaker. And you pull it out an inch or two, you listen, you rotate it an inch or two side to side, you listen. The goal is to get it locked in and seamless. And I felt like it was 95% there. And just for kicks, I decided to take out that high-level connector that goes to the amp. And I tried it with low-level connections. Now, at this time, I swapped in a Passlabs X250.8 amp, which is a fully balanced amp. And if you use the high-level connectors on a Passlabs amp, you do not hook up that ground to one of the black terminals on the back of the amp. It could destroy or harm, I should say, the sub or the amp. I'm not sure which one. So you leave that cable floating. Now with the Passlabs, I did try the high-level connection and the low-level connection. And I much preferred the low-level connection. The PassLabs XP22 preamp I have has 3 preamp outs, a balanced and 2 RCAs. So if I have the preamp hooked up to my amp balanced with XLR cables, that means I have 2 more preamp outputs, right? So I was able to take a pair of subwoofer cables and hook them into the REL's low-level input. So eliminating that proprietary cable and high-level input. And I'm telling you, I'm getting a more seamless integration this way. The sub never calls attention to itself. I don't have that boominess with some songs. It's much better integrated, at least in this room, with my speakers and my amp, using the low-level connection versus the high-level connection. And believe me, I spent the last 4 or 5 weeks swapping, testing, moving, everything. And by far, and Debbie agrees, she listens with me in here all the time, the low-level input gave me a much more seamless integration. And that's when I started noticing that depth, right? The sound stage increasing in size, the airiness a little bit better. The vocals is where I notice some of that bass reinforcement. I start to hear the voices get chesty. I turn that down a couple notches and there's a little bit of weight added to the vocals, but they're still extremely transparent and holographic. So I got the sub dialed in and I left it on for 2 weeks of almost daily listening. And I was like, man, this system sounds incredible right now, better than I've ever heard it in this room, bar none, right? So one day I'm listening and Debbie and I were in here and I'm like, let's turn off the subwoofer. I usually have it on auto, so when it senses a signal, it comes on automatically. I turned it off and the sound just went flat. All of a sudden, the sound I loved before the sub didn't sound nearly as rich. It didn't sound as transparent. It didn't sound as magical. I turn the sub back on and we don't notice any sounds coming from the sub in the corner. It should be totally invisible when well implemented. But lo and behold, everything comes back into focus. Like when I turn on the sub, it was like, pew, like you have a snap and everything is back where it should be. Now, this got me thinking, man, everybody says a pair of subs in a 2-channel system is where it's at. And I'm going to have to get a second S510, I was telling myself. I haven't done that yet because these things are not cheap, but just adding the one S510 really improved my system dramatically. In fact, I would say it's one of the 2 best investments I've made in this system. And it was my stubbornness, right, over the last 20 years. I hated subs. My experience with prior subs and them being boomy and uncontrollable and sloppy and loose and slow in my 2-channel system was my fault for buying the wrong subs and putting them in the wrong system, right? Went with a REL, extremely musical subs. That's what I can tell you. Now, I don't have experience with other big name subs or other subs that may be superior, other subs that proclaim to be great with music, right? I know there's subs by KEF, and they have some very well-reviewed subwoofers right now. But if it ain't broke, I'm not going to try to fix it. The REL S510 in this system is amazing. And when I can afford it, I will add a second REL S510, and I'll use the second pre-out, the low-level connection on that. It'll go in the other corner, and I'm sure I will see improvements in that as well. But yeah, consider me converted to subwoofer use for a 2-channel system. Now, I tried the sub with various speakers. With the Fleetwood DeVilles, it's a night and day difference. It adds that information below the 45 hertz that the DeVilles go to, and there's no loss of any information. We get everything that's on the recording. Now, sometimes you will not hear the subwoofer at all because a lot of music, actually most music, doesn't have anything in that 20 hertz range or below. Most music lives in that 80, 100 hertz, even 60 hertz range when it comes to the lower frequencies. Only some music will have that extra low level information. But again, with a sub like this, or from what I hear, a pair of them, better yet, it's going to do more for your system than just add bass. And I found that to be absolutely true. And I'm so glad that I got one on my own and I went through the whole ritual of setting it up myself. It took me about a month to get it perfected and dialed in, but now I've learned about how to place a sub, how to set the crossover, how to set the volume. On the back of the REL, you are going to set your crossover point and your volume. Now, this is a pretty powerful sub. I have a 13 by 18 room here, and I barely have to put any volume at all. I'd say I'm at about 6 clicks from bottom with volume, and I'm about 11, 12 clicks up on the crossover. And this has really, really, really improved the system in so many ways, as I've discussed. So I'm a believer in high quality subwoofers now. Seeing that this was probably the best investment I've made in this system at $2,700. No, it's not cheap, but what it did to my system makes it well worth the price.